Well, hello everyone. Thank you for your time and attention. Joining us for this webinar, this is Octopus 101. My name is John Bristow. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. I'm a community director for Octopus Deploy. My job is to look after folks like yourself who are interested in Octopus to help guide them to the various resources that we have to showcase what's possible. This webinar, as entitled, is a introduction to Octopus. So if you've never seen Octopus before, don't worry, you're in the right place. This is a great way to see how Octopus works, what it is, and why we created it. Throughout this webinar, you have a chance of asking questions, so you can feel free to ask your questions as they come up. We have a live Q&A page that I'll monitor throughout today's webinar, so feel free to utilize that. In addition to that, this webinar will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel, which is available if you search for Octopus Deploy, you should be able to find it. We post to that channel all the time, weekly, if not daily, and there's a variety of videos that you can watch to help continue your journey in terms of educating yourself around Octopus itself. Just before we begin, I'd like to share with you some resources to help you get started. So this is one resource we have. This is our webinars site. So if you're here, congratulations, you made it to the right location. You'll find us at octopus.com/webinars. And here you'll find a bunch of webinars that we have coming up later this month and next. So on August 14th, we have Phil Holloman of GitHub. He's the field CTO, joining Bob Walker, our field CTO of Octopus. And together they will be talking about improving DevX and deployments with GitHub Copilot and Octopus Deploy. This is a great webinar. You should definitely check it out. You may have heard that we have a integration with GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot has features for extensions, so you can extend the capabilities of GitHub Copilot through models, and so you can have a sort of natural conversation with Octopus Deploy through GitHub Copilot. And so if you want to see that, if you want to check out what that looks like, you can attend this webinar, which is on August 14th. Throughout this month and next, we have a series of webinars from CodeFresh. They have started off with all things CI/CD. This is going to be posted to our YouTube channels very soon. This was a couple days ago, but later on, don't worry, later on, August 20th, we'll have another one featuring GitOps and Argo. And then wrapping things up in September, we'll have one on environments and progressions. If you're wanting to see Argo in production, if you're wanting to see how it looks and how it works, this is a great webinar series to check out. In addition to that, we have our webinar series around Octopus itself, Kubernetes, etc. So today is our 101. Later on the 22nd of August, we have Kubernetes workload reliability best practices. So if you're at all curious about how to manage Kubernetes clusters and taking a look at how you distribute workloads in a reliable fashion, we have Liam and Frank who are going to be joining us to tell us about some of the things that they employ. That is on August 22nd. And then later on August 27th, we have members of the Octopus Cloud team talking to us about how they use Kubernetes themselves to build, create, maintain Octopus Cloud. So we use Kubernetes quite extensively for our SaaS product, which is called Octopus Cloud. And you can check that out if you're all curious on August 27th. So these are a whole bunch of webinars we have available. Definitely worth checking out. So to get things started, let's go ahead and start by visiting our website. So obviously you've come to our website, which is octopus.com. If you go to that URL, you'll see a page that looks like this. We're going to be talking about essentially everything that you see in this display here. So everything that you see showing the natural progression of how software gets shipped from basically your development environment into the hands of your customers. That is what we'll be talking about in the context of today's webinar. So to kick things off, let's start by talking a little bit about Octopus and why it exists. If you need to reach me, by the way, you can reach me at this email address. Definitely worth checking out. So let's start by talking a little bit about what you'll learn in this webinar. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about how Octopus works, and more importantly, why you should use it. So when you look at a technology, oftentimes you'll kind of sit there scratching your head thinking, what is the purpose of this? I don't understand why this technology exists. And it's not until you understand the problem domain that it tries to address or solve that it becomes much, much clearer. I think it's very important to understand the why as opposed to the what or the how when looking at technology. We'll then talk a little bit about some fundamental concepts around Octopus, namely terms like projects, deployment processes, releases. These are sort of core ideas that we have around how Octopus works in the course of deploying your software. And so we'll define those things so that when you talk about Octopus or you talk about deployment processes yourself, you'll come from that perspective. I know or realize or sympathize that a lot of folks may not have deployment processes set up in their organization, and so this might be a new concept for them. We've been doing this for well over a decade, so it's something of sort of like common terms for us, but we'll define those terms so we can have a common conversation. We'll then talk about how to create what's called a deployment process. A deployment process is basically like a recipe to make something in the kitchen. It's the series of steps that are followed to get your software into the hands of customers. So we define that as a deployment process, and we'll show you how that is built. And then finally, we'll wrap things up by talking about how you can trigger those deployment processes from a CI process or server. So CI stands for continuous integration. It's a term that's used to define how software is typically tested, built, and then moved down the pipeline to the next phase, which is typically deployment. So we'll talk about all of that and much, much more. And so, yeah, if you have any questions, as I said, feel free to submit them to the chat. Happy to answer them. So let's begin our conversation by talking about the state of the world or the realities that a lot of developers tend to face. So in this scenario, it's very simple. We're a simple developer. We're producing an app, which is on the left-hand side. Notice that our developer or DevOps engineer, whatever term you want to give it is fine, is very happy. He or she is utilizing a set of deployment scripts, possibly written by this person, to deploy software to production, and that is getting into the hands of customers. And this is typically a very basic scenario that you'll see, and basic scenarios are quite easy actually, so which is great. But as we know, software evolves and requirements evolve and grow. And so as the situation changes, we've noticed that the developer here is now getting a little bit less impressed. The developer here is now having to maintain or ship multiple versions of their deployment scripts. So those versions are going to different customers. Their different versions of the application are going to different members. They may be going to different targets as well. So these targets include things like the cloud, Kubernetes, on the metal, such as web servers, etc. And so there's a lot of uncertainty in this scenario, which is why the developer or DevOps engineer is getting a little bit less impressed. The uncertainty comes from the fact that these deployment scripts are hard to maintain, they're brittle, and we haven't really talked about the concepts that are typically talked about greatly in deployment processes, such as rollback, canary, phased deployments, etc., blue-green. These sort of patterns are patterns for a reason. They're employed across the industry, and I highly doubt that this person here is utilizing those patterns. And as all scenarios go, this scenario has actually morphed or grown into almost an impossible scenario where the DevOps engineer is now struggling mightily to ship multiple versions of their application to multiple types of environments and different types of customers. Because the reality is, as your application successfully grows and hopefully gets more users, those users' requirements change. And so you may have users who need different versions of your application based on their locality or geography. You may have different types of you may have different types of apps based on user roles, etc. So these really do pose a problem when doing your deployments, because obviously you want to ship different versions of applications out. And so it can be a bit of a challenge here. And so as you grow and scale your application, things get more complicated. And so really, this is where Octopus Deploy tends to shine. So we focus primarily on that last sort of mile around your CI/CD pipeline. So we focus on basically making your complex deployments easy. And so deployment is now managed as through a single source of truth, which is Octopus itself. We maintain those deployment processes, and we provide you a single deployment automation platform for you to use going forward as part of this process. And so this is there to basically allow you to have consistency and compliance, all while maintaining a deployment process that is easy to understand. And so, as you can see, the face of the DevOps engineer has dramatically shifted and changed. Deployment is no longer really a concern. In fact, deployment is seen as a strength. So you may have heard of this term called continuous deployment or continuous delivery. That is something that we espouse all the time at Octopus Deploy. This idea that you can constantly be shipping software to a variety of customers or tenants, like it's another term that we use called tenants. An idea of a tenant is like a different type of, let's say you're running a pet shop and you have different types of stores based on geography. So you have East US, West US. You may have different types of applications based on your geography. Those are called tenants. And so this concept of continuous delivery or continuous deployment is something that is very much at the heart of Octopus. And that's something that we espouse. And so this makes the DevOps engineer feel really, really good about their job. So the way that we also think about Octopus is that it's part of what we call a best of breed pipeline. So we are obviously aware of the fact that there are many solutions out there. There are solutions for issue management. There are solutions for source control, for hosting. We don't try to address those at all. In fact, there are many, many good providers that we use and love that are really good at providing solutions to those problems. But we largely believe that the issue around deployments, and in particular continuous deployments, is a largely unsolved problem until you consider solutions like Octopus Deploy. And you see this with a variety of scenarios. Like just a couple of weeks ago, we had the CrowdStrike incident where a bunch of Windows machines, millions and millions of Windows machines were affected or impacted by an update that wasn't using Canary or a phased rollout approach. It basically was deployed across all of these Windows machines en masse at once. And so you could argue that a better deployment strategy is needed. And in fact, if you take a look at what they did with CrowdStrike, one of the things that they observed was they need to change is around their deployment process. And so this is something that we talk about all the time at Octopus. So this is something that definitely rang true for us. You should use Canary, etc. And just to put it out there, Canary deployment is basically utilizing a small, finite set of targets or deployment targets that you can use to test out features before they go en masse to everyone else. So the idea is that it's like a canary in the coal mine. So with this scenario where we look at a pipeline, a CI/CD pipeline, where on the left we have our sort of approach where issues turn to source code turns to build commands produce binaries get shipped and then shipped to deployment targets. In the middle where that deployment scenario is, there's a big question mark, and we feel that Octopus does a really good job of solving that problem. We're also aware of the fact that there are a variety of solutions out there for doing other things as well. So we're not tied directly, say, to GitHub Actions or to different types of targets such as Azure. We're very cognizant of the fact that there are many types of CI process and server solutions out there, as well as cloud solutions, etc. Those are two small examples, but we observe that there's definitely an ecosystem of choice out there, and so we integrate with all of that, and I'll show you how that happens. In addition to that, there are other ways in which these things can happen. So the provisioning of infrastructure via Terraform through configuration is something that we also support, or ITSM integration via Jira Service Desk or ServiceNow. That is something also that we integrate very, very deeply with. All right, so let's take a look at a demo. All right, so just quickly check the comments to see if there are any questions. There are no questions. That's either great news or not so great news, but there you go. All right, so let's jump into Octopus itself. So this is the dashboard for Octopus Deploy, and I'll just expand this to full screen so you can get a sense of what this looks like. So what you see here is the dashboard, which is typically the scenario that most people are accustomed when working with Octopus itself. The dashboard is basically your one-stop shop for seeing the status of all your projects, the state of their deployments, where they're deployed to, how they've been deployed. And so it's a really good way of getting a sense of how your projects are shipping. Now, in this scenario here, I have a very simple one just to start us off. But as you can probably see, if I switch over to another instance here, you can see that dashboards can get quite complicated. You can see there we have on the top here a variety of environments. And then on the left-hand side, we have our projects. And then in the middle here, we have the various states of our deployments, the versions that they're shipped to, whether they were successful or not, etc. So the dashboard provides you that single lens or single point of knowledge of where deployments are at in terms of how things are going. Now, before we get into doing a deployment, let's just take a look at how we can go about isolating these things from each other. So we have this concept of what are called spaces. A space is an isolation boundary. It is there basically to provide you isolation from different projects, and there's a whole set of permissions and roles that come about this. But I'd like to start things off with a blank slate, so I'm going to create a new one here. I'm going to give this a name called Octopus 101, and I'll give myself the admin rights for this because, you know, that's always a nice thing to do. So I've created a new space here called Octopus 101. Let's jump into that space and see how it looks. So I've switched over to that space. This is the blank hello world sort of starting point of getting your deployment set up. So here we have a nice little dialog says, okay, let's deploy your first application. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll give this a name. So I'll call this Octopus 101. Notice in here, we have an option here to say use version control for this project. So something that's worth mentioning is the fact that everything that you do here is underpinned by source control if you so choose. So you can utilize a Git-based repository for this if you want. You don't have to, but it's certainly something that you can do if you wish. We have other options here that we can specify as well. I'm going to assume the defaults and just click Save. Now, when I do this, and let me go back to full screen so you can see this a little bit easier. When I do this, it's going to ask me to specify a list of environments. So an environment is basically the way in which your projects are organized by servers or services, and they are semantically meaningful to you and you only. They don't really have much bearing at all in terms of their naming for Octopus. But this is a typical scenario where you'll see things like development staging or test and then production. These environments are typically what you see in internal QA labs, etc. So I'll assume these ones. I can add many more if I want. There's no restriction on that, but I'll hit save. So now that we've done that, we're now going to get into the sort of meat and potatoes or the heart of Octopus itself, which is the deployment process. The deployment process, as I said before, is like defining a recipe for how you deploy, the series of steps of how you deploy software. And this is really where a lot of folks spend a lot of their time and energy on, is defining and refining these deployment process. Out of the box, we provide a couple of very simple examples. These are based on, we have shell script support for things like PowerShell and Bash, but we can go ahead and create a process from scratch. When we click on that button, we're taken into this process editor. And what you see here is a set of process step templates that are available for you to use. A step template is a step is basically an operation in the context of a deployment process. So the idea here is that I may want to do something, a first step, a second step as part of a deployment process. And we have a variety of categories here on the left-hand side. You can see they're broken down by categories. So you can see we have ones around scripting. We have ones for packages. Here are ones built in for Kubernetes, if you're doing anything with that. Docker support. If you're targeting a particular cloud native service like AWS or Azure, these are built in out of the box with Octopus itself. So you can pick one of these and start the process of editing and building out your deployment process. Now, to keep things simple, I'm going to use the step template here called Run a Script. This is our most popular step by far in Octopus. And the reason why is because it gives you full control over what you do in the context of that. So let's go ahead and add that to our deployment process. And you'll notice that when I do, I get this well that appears on the left-hand side. So what you'll see here is a series of steps, one after another, that define essentially my deployment process. Now, these steps can run either one after another. They can be run sequentially, or they can be run in parallel, or they can be dependent on each other. So you can think of a deployment process as like a workflow, and that's what we're defining here. Now, when you configure these steps, there's a whole bunch of knobs and buttons that you can certainly tweak. And don't worry if you don't understand what these things are. There's a whole bunch of settings here. What we try to do is we try and at the top expose the most critical parts of the step. The refinements around how it runs, when it runs, the conditions around those sorts of things, those are all defined underneath. We're not going to worry about that for now. But you'll notice here that for this step, which is run a script, basically the simplest step you can get, I can either define it as an inline script. I can have that script come from a Git repository, or I can have it from a package. A package is like a file, typically in the form of a binary, like a NuGet package or a zip archive. I'm going to choose to use an inline script simply because it's nice to work with. And you notice we provide this inline source code editor experience. We have integration with a variety of script languages, and I can start, adding those commands here if I wanted. Some things to note is we have support for a variety of what are called variables. So variables are basically replacement values that I can use. And the reason why this is nice is, and this really speaks to the heart of why you use a tool like Octopus Deploy for deployment processes. The reason why this is nice is because this is something that is typically forgotten about in the context of defining a deployment script. So a lot of folks will write deployment scripts and they'll hard code or wire up hard-coded values in their deployment scripts, and they're inflexible. They're very rigid in their definition. And so I can utilize these variables very easily simply by referencing them in the context of a script here. And the reason why that's nice is because your variables can change depending upon the type of environment you're targeting, the deployment target you wish to target, maybe other contexts as well. You can also define your own variables as well. So it makes your deployment scripts very, very flexible and easy to work with. So I can define a whole bunch of script here. And just to kind of flesh out some of the things that I mentioned earlier, you can define things like run conditions. You can say that this step will always run, or it will only run in the case of a successful run of the previous step or a failed run of the previous step. I can also specify things like retries. So this is more about the reliability of deployments. Oftentimes you'll have a step that will do a network call. And as we all know, networks can be sometimes flaky. So you get latency, things like that. This gives you a little bit of assurance there that if the first try doesn't succeed, we'll go ahead and allow it to retry. So a common example of this is using Azure. Sometimes if you upload a large binary, not uncommon for, say, like a web project, if you're doing a NuGet deployment, this will typically experience some problems, especially if your network isn't great. So having a retry capability is great. Another capability here that we have built in, and these are common across all steps, by the way. Well, most steps, there are some examples, some exceptions. But you can also specify how long you wish to wait until you deem a step has failed. This is called a step timeout. So timeouts, retries, other things like that, these are the conditions that you can define on steps and utilize them in context. I can add additional steps as well. So we just took a look at a very simple example, which is run a script. But there are many other examples that we can use as well. So for example, if I wanted to deploy a Helm chart, you can see here a Helm chart integration allows me to specify where that chart comes from, whether it's in a package, and the types of options that I want to specify when utilizing a Helm chart. A Helm chart is a way in which you can define configuration for your Kubernetes clusters. Allows you to do deployments very easily against Kubernetes, and is there as kind of like a package manager for Kubernetes. It's really easy to use. And so that's a way in which you can do that. So you can notice that as I'm adding these steps here, I'm building out my deployment process on the left-hand side. So if I add, say, for example, apply a Terraform template, you can see that I'm building out my steps one after another here on the left-hand side. That is my deployment process. So when you think about deployment processes, think of steps occurring one after each other. So I want to make sure that this is live. So we've got a question here. So Vlad asks, is there a full equivalent of configuration as code for all the UI-based configuration options? Yes, there is. So you may remember earlier when I created this project initially, there was that option to specify whether I want to use source control. When you specify that option, we write to a Git-based repository as configuration as code. So what we do is we emit a text file that you can manipulate. What that means is you can do all these changes that you're seeing here through a Git-based repository. So you can set things up, use this as a management utility if you want, and then you can test out changes through branches. You can do that all through a text file that we define. We have integration with Visual Studio Code if you want syntax highlighting. There's a variety of options there. So great question, Vlad. Thanks. That wasn't a setup, but I appreciate Vlad's question because it definitely highlights one of the features that we have, which is built in for config as code. Thank you for that question. So you can see I'm defining my process here. I have a series of steps. I can also define whether or not these steps are defined as child steps, or whether or not they'll execute based on conditions. So a child step might be something like, hey, after I do my Terraform configuration apply. If you haven't seen Terraform before, basically you define a configuration file, and it's kind of like, the analogy I keep using is like the Genesis device from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. It's basically a nice tool for you to terraform or change configuration through basically a device, in this case Terraform. It's aptly named Terraform. It allows you to do configuration changes en masse. And so if I wanted to do a child step here, let's say I want to do something with the Docker network, I don't know why, but you can see how our UI has changed here now. We've defined now a child step as part of this process. So these and other changes as I'm making manipulations to my deployment process are all constructed here. So I can do all of this, which is great. I'm going to just discard these changes, and I'll show you a very simple example of what this looks like in the context of just running a script. So we're going to go back to a very simple example. I'll go full screen so you can see this. So here we just have a simple hello world script that's running. This script here is just going to emit directly as part of this a simple text message to the console. Let's go ahead and see how we can now deploy this to our targets. So the way we do that is we define what's called a release. A release is a snapshot of values that we use in the context of our deployments. So in this example, sorry, I'm just trying to bring my face back here so you can see me talk. So a release is, as I said before, a set of values that are snapshotted. And this is another great feature of Octopus, the fact that oftentimes when doing manual deployments or deployments using your own scripts, this concept of snapshots doesn't exist, right? So a snapshot is a point in time when you define a release, which is the version of the release itself, all the release notes that went into that, the configuration values, the target, all that sort of stuff. These and other sort of pieces of the deployment are often forgotten because deployment scripts, if written by themselves, are basically points in time when executed. Whereas a release is a snapshot of all the values that went into that release itself. The reason why we do this is because it allows you to do some really interesting things. So a release allows you to define those things so that you can execute them consistently across environments so that values can change. But it also allows you this concept of knowing what happened and when. So we have a full audit trail as part of this. So I'll save this as a release 001. And you'll notice here, this is the snapshot of all the values and config options and packages and Git resources and everything else that went into defining this release. Now, we haven't shipped anything. We haven't done a deployment. All we've done is we've defined this thing called a release, and now we have the capability of doing a deployment. So let's go ahead and do that. So I can choose to deploy this to a variety of environments at the same time if I want. I'll just choose to issue it against deployment itself, but I can certainly choose a combination of environments to deploy this to if I wanted to. When we define a deployment, we can also specify things like when we want it shipped, so either now or later. What priority that deployment comes in. So don't forget, Octopus Deploy is not just doing a single project at a time. It's used for multiple projects at the same time across multiple deployment targets. So you might have tons and tons of teams using Octopus at the same time. And so what happens is if they're doing continuous delivery and deployment, there's a lot of deployments going on. You may want to give this deployment priority. There are a variety of reasons why you may want to do this. Let's say it's Christmas and you're shipping to a website and you're a shopping website and you want to get a change out that, puts PS5 consoles on sale, and you want to get that out, you can mark it as priority, and that will elevate the status of that deployment in your queue. You can also specify things like, do you want to exclude any steps from the deployment itself? So you can specify whether or not those steps are going to run or not. You can also define that as part of the deployment process, by the way. I don't have time to show you everything, but you can do that as well. You can specify a failure mode as well. Failure mode is basically, what do you do when errors occur? Because let's face it, deployments aren't always going to be super successful. Sometimes fails occur. And so we have a feature called guided failure mode, which allows you to, as it specifies here, is when an error is encountered during the deployment, Octopus will pause and allow you to correct the error before proceeding. This is a nice feature that we have built in because oftentimes folks sometimes get things wrong, which is fine. So we support that as well. We can also preview and customize the changes that we're going to occur. But if everything looks happy, we'll go ahead and click on the green deploy button and we'll go ahead and issue this deployment. Now, I'm not really doing anything special here. I'm utilizing a cloud-based deployment model here. I'm using a task runner that we provide to do a very simple run a script. So nothing magical here, but you can imagine, if you will, I'm invoking a deployments process that is talking to Azure or AWS and doing Terraform changes, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots and lots of stuff that I could be doing. And what I'm trying to get at is the fact here that we provide for you a task log of everything that's occurring when you do your deployments. And so this gives you full traceability into what's happening as it's doing a deployment. So you can see all this thing. You get, of course, the nice little display here. When you do a deployment, we give you a full audit trail of everything that occurs when doing a deployment. So you can debug these things, but more importantly, you can see who did the deployment, when did they do deployment, etc. So this will show up in the task log. We'll also provide a summary of that. If there are other things as well, like changes or build info are like the Git commits that went into that release. So you can actually do the automation of a change log if you wanted to through your build info commits, etc. But now that I've done this, if I go back to my project and my dashboard, there is my deployment. So I can now click on this if I wanted to, and I can see that exact same screen that I saw, which is my release that has been deployed successfully. I can promote this if I want to staging. So I can now move that over to staging if I wish, and I can go through the whole setup routine as well, just like I did before. So there we go. Another question here from Vlad. Let's go ahead and show this. So setting up a release in the UI is nice, but typically this comes from a Git repo tag. How will that UI option release concept fits when the Git-based release model? So what you'll see here is if I enabled backing of a source control, so if I use VCS back source control, you'll see little icons appear here next to these items, denoting that these are backed by source control. And there's a drop-down list here that allows you to specify the branch that you want to use in the context of your VCS-backed Octopus deploy project. So projects will be backed and will surface out those Git isms, if you will, like branches, etc. And we'll show you that actually you're operating on main or you're operating on branch 1, and we'll expose that. And you can do the switch through a drop-down box if I have that enabled here. So that is exposed through the UI. And you can still operate the way you would typically do underneath. So you do your Git commits, etc. You utilize, if you're utilizing GitLab or GitHub, you can simply work with it that way. But if you're utilizing the UI, those will be surfaced out through the UI itself. And so we show those values through the UI. Awesome. All right. So there you go. Congratulations. That's your first exposure to Octopus. So, you know, that's basically how simple it can be. Now, obviously, there's a lot of other stuff that we ship as part of the product. We haven't even talked about things like insights or integrations that we support, which we'll talk about next. But this is essentially Octopus in a nutshell. The core or heart of this is the deployment process, the series of steps that you define to define how software is shipped. And as you saw, there's lots of support out there in the tool for a variety of different targets. So let's go ahead and switch over back to our slides. So some of the things that I showed you here, you saw the UI control. The nice thing about a deployment process is it defines a visual representation of that process and allows you to include any conditions or child steps, which you saw. We also integrate Markdown-based notes as part of this. So obviously we recognize the fact that you're working in a team, and it won't just be yourself looking at the deployment process. It may be members of your team. So you have to, like code comments, you have to have notes that summarize what these steps do. We support things like parallel step execution and conditions. We also have support for environment labels. So you can have these steps run only on certain environments. So an example might be, this step will only run in production, meaning when I'm targeting a production deployment, this step will run. There are various scenarios where you want that to occur, and I'll show you some examples of that in our next demo. But we surface that out. Now, a question that often comes up is, so why am I using this? Well, as you may have hopefully seen in the demo I just showed, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to build out a deployment process that is not only reliable, but it has a little bit of risk-free element to it because we build in support for rollback. Deployments, sadly to say, aren't 100% foolproof, and so sometimes you have to roll back or revert any changes that you may have made in your various environments, and we support that out of the box with Octopus itself. We also support a feature called runbooks. Runbooks are for your operations team. So what we try and do is we provide a solution that your ops team can use in conjunction with your DevX or DevOps team. And the reason why is because there are often scenarios where users want to run operations against their infra. So things like updating databases, cleaning up logs, things like that. And we build that out of the box with steps as well. And it's a feature we have called runbooks. So you can now pair up you get your end-to-end solution in terms of DevOps. You get true development teams using this and true ops teams using this for those operations. If you're utilizing containers and you're wanting to target Kubernetes, we have built out of the box support for those containers. We have integration and understanding of YAML, Helm charts. We integrate with a variety of Kubernetes ecosystem tools like Kustomize. So these and other sorts of ways in which you can use containers and Kubernetes and Docker, for example, are built out of the box. And then this feature, which is probably our most powerful feature, is a feature called tenants. Tenants is what you'll typically see used by more mature users of Octopus. And when they start using it, they never want to get rid of it. So tenants are like the various versions of your application that exist based on things like different geographies. So if you're wanting to target customers, who are based in different locations, etc., and you want to have different versions of your application, rather than having to build that into your application logic itself, you can simply create new versions of that application based on a tenant deployment configuration, and we build that built into Octopus. It's a feature we have called multi-tenancy, and it's really the main reason why a lot of folks love Octopus is multi-tenancy, because as I said, as customers grow and evolve and become more mature in terms of their deployment processes, it's a feature that they use a lot. And then finally, obviously, and most importantly, you want to make sure that everything is audited so that if things go wrong, you can definitely, not to get blame, but you can certainly point the finger at, okay, we need to change this. That also applies to our compliance. So excuse me here. Just battling a cold, so apologies for that. It also applies to our compliance. So oftentimes, folks will use things like ServiceNow or Jira Service Desk with release teams, etc. And so we want to integrate with that governance. And so we have integration with those scenarios. So you can actually coordinate a release that's triggered via ServiceNow, for example. So you can issue a release through ServiceNow that will communicate to Octopus and flow through into Octopus to control that deployment. There are other integration points as well. So if you want to export your audit logs to a third-party provider, we support that as well. There are various other scenarios in which we can look at. All right, let's switch back into a demo. So there we go. Oh, there's another question here from Vlad. I want to make sure that you guys get your questions answered. The example you showed is very simple. Yes. The majority of other tools can do this very well. Yes. So for instance, GitHub Actions. Where does Octopus value is visible the most? It really comes into play when looking at definement of environments, etc. So you can define environments in GitHub Actions, for example. So just jumping on the example, GitHub Actions does define the concepts of environments, but it's a text-based value, and it's something that you define yourself. And beyond that, it really doesn't have any really much value in terms of your deployment. And oftentimes, and this really speaks to an issue here, is that a lot of CI vendors try and make deployment a built-in capability, and they do it really, really badly. Or if none at all. So solutions like GitHub via GitHub Actions, you're basically left to defining it via YAML and script, etc., and you're kind of left to your own devices. And even then, a lot of the actions that are defined within the marketplace don't do a great job of deploying to the types of scenarios that you see within internal environments. So deployment to SQL, deployment to on the metal Nginx, for example, or if you're deploying to a variety of different targets, those things aren't really covered. And you can search in GitHub Marketplace and see the lack of support thereof. The concept of rollbacks, the concept of environment definitions. These and other things are not really well defined. And even if you're running GitHub Enterprise within your organization, that still is the same model applied. And so we're only a deployment tool. We try not to focus too much on the CI integration. In fact, what we try and leverage is the integration that we have built in with those CI processes. So let them be the CI process and let us be the CD process, because they're best of both worlds. And to showcase that as an example, we actually have a website here. This is at octopus.com/integrations. And when you take a look at this, you'll see all the integrations that we support out of the box for Octopus itself. So if we take a look at an example like GitHub, for example, we have a variety of steps that you can use. We also have GitHub Actions. We have a GitHub app. We have integration with GitHub Copilot. These and other ways in which you can integrate GitHub in the context of Octopus is exposed. To show you an example of what that integration looks like, so here's an example of GitHub Actions. So here I have a standard workflow defined in YAML within GitHub. YAML is the sort of lingua franca of defining workflows within GitHub itself. Some may argue it's not great, but there you go. So here I'm defining a bunch of steps for doing a build. And as part of this process near here at the bottom, I'm utilizing a series of actions. And these actions allow me to integrate with Octopus. So we can create and deploy releases in the context of GitHub directly here. So all those features that are built into Octopus, being able to support compliance, being able to do rollbacks, being able to do multi-tenancy, etc., all that is exposed, and you can utilize the GitHub action to do this. Now, this step would be redundant if we have integration with our GitHub app. So our GitHub app allows seamless communication between GitHub and Octopus, so you don't need a series of steps like this. You can simply just create the release itself, or you can have it triggered automatically as well. But essentially, you're not left to your own devices in terms of defining workflows, etc. You can use that visual environment if you want. Another example of this might be Azure DevOps. So Azure DevOps is another CI process or server, and you can see we provide a series of tasks that you can run in the context of this. So if you want to, say, push packages, which is like a binary, so like a DLL or a zip archive or some other binary no file, these and other packages you can push. You can create releases, you can deploy them, you can promote them. These are all supported through our integration with Azure DevOps. We are the _1 integration within the JetBrains marketplace for TeamCity. So if you're utilizing TeamCity as your backend build CI process, for example, we integrate with that. We are by far the #1 integration with that. So TeamCity and Octopus is like the peanut butter and chocolate combination. So these are other examples of integrations, is how we try to differentiate ourselves. And again, we're focused solely here on deployments. We're not trying to make it a more seamless experience from just providing CI as well. But we try and provide the best deployment tool that is available on the market, and then we integrate through these integrations in a variety of means. Excuse me. So as you can see, integrations here live in a variety of different ways, and you can visit this site if you're at all interested to explore more about what those things look like. And so thanks, Vlad, for your question. I really appreciate that. And it's because this is a one-on-one, I can't show you all the most complicated scenarios. We have videos on all of this stuff, by the way, if you visit our YouTube channel. But these and other scenarios we certainly integrate with. And, you know, it really is a bit of a shootout in that perspective. You know, you have to obviously compare and contrast the various solutions that are out there. But we think we do a really good job in terms of deployments. So looking at a more complicated example here. So this is a project that you can kick the can if you want, or kick the tires yourself if you want. This lives at our cloud instance, which is demo.octopus.app. We also have sample.octopus.app as well. These other cloud instances are publicly available for you to poke at. You can see if we take a look at the deployment process here, these deployment processes can change and look wildly different depending upon how you define them. So some of the more common scenarios you see around deployment processes is you'll typically see tens of steps. We've seen deployment processes from customers that are hundreds of steps. If you get to that many steps, it's a bit complicated, but you know, an average sort of deployment process is around 20, 30 steps. And these are the series of steps that will run in context of your deployments. So when these deployments occur, they do so, and the dashboard is really where a lot of folks see the value in a lot of these things. I mentioned earlier that we have support for things like insights. So we expose to you a bunch of data around DORA-based metrics. So we show you data around DORA metrics for mean time to recovery or deployment failure rate, etc. And so we track a lot of these things as part of the tool itself. There are a variety of other features as well, but this is the integration point that we have. And when utilizing a deployment tool such as Octopus, this is the value that a lot of customers see is in that deployment scenario there. So I mentioned some of the integrations as well. We have also our roadmap, which is at roadmap.octopus.com. If you go there, you'll see a site that looks like this. Our roadmap is where we track all of our ideas, as well as try and give folks a sense of what's coming next. So if you visit this website, you'll see a list of products that are under consideration. You'll also see ones that are planned, and you'll see ones that are released. We've shipped a lot over the past number of weeks, months, etc. And just to get started, just to put it out there, you can get started through one of two ways. When you start a trial, you can either download and install it yourself, so you can run it yourself within your environment, or you can utilize a cloud instance. So we have a SaaS-based model here. We can stand it up for you, your infrastructure, we host it for you. So that's the way in which Octopus operates in terms of that. So just checking the time, we are at 50 minutes past. I just wanted to wrap up with a few other things before we take any more questions. So we talked a lot about how Octopus works, why it exists, etc. We've only scratched the surface. Obviously, the proof is in obviously kicking the tires yourself. I would strongly encourage you to go check out a trial, set up a cloud instance as well. You can certainly start poking it and get a sense of how to define deployment processes. As part of this webinar, you learned about a little bit about what projects are, deployment processes, and releases. You saw how to create a process from scratch, as well as what they look like in the more complicated scenarios. And then finally, how to trigger those through deployment integration, CI integration. I showed you 3 examples: GitHub, Azure DevOps, and TeamCity. The TeamCity one is very simple. It's just based on a very simple definition. Now, if we don't support integrate directly with a product out of the box, don't worry, we have a variety of steps available from the community. We have over 500 community step templates. So these are step templates that are built by the community for a variety of integration points. So out of the box, we ship a lot of integration, but obviously we don't live in a bubble. We're aware of the fact that there's a variety of different types of steps out there. So you can check out all the steps that are available. In fact, let me just jump over quickly to what that looks like here. If you want to see what those community steps look like, jumping back to our 101 here, when we define a new step here, one of the categories that you see at the bottom here are community steps. So all these steps here are written by our community, and these are ones for scenarios that we don't support out of the box. So if you're looking to integrate with, I don't know, Redis or Pingdom or LaunchDarkly or Docker, CyberArk, etc., these and other sorts of scenarios, these are all supported by our community steps. So there you go. We provide our downloads available through octopus.com, which I showed you earlier. We have integrations that are also available through a variety of different means. As I said, we have our roadmap, which provides a series of new features. You saw an example of that. That's at roadmap.octopus.com. And finally, we also have our community. So you'll find this at octopus.com/community. Make sure to check that out there. We have a Slack that you can join. We have over 6,500 people in that Slack talking about deployments. We have a variety of resources to check out as well. And don't forget, we also have our YouTube channel. So recording of this webinar will be made available there. The link for that is in this slide, youtube.com/octopusdeploy. We post videos weekly, as I said before, if not daily. Our docs have done a radical sort of change. We've got a great sort of facelift. We've had support dark mode now, so those are worth checking out. We publish a bunch of videos all the time. But there you have it. There is Octopus 101 for your entertainment. So there you go. So if you want to check out what Octopus looks like, you can visit our website at octopus.com. I'm just checking our questions here to make sure there are any other questions that haven't been answered. I don't see any listed here. We'll give it another 5 seconds. We'll wrap up the stream. This is me tap dancing. So anyways, thanks for your time and attention. I really appreciate it. Hopefully this starts your journey utilizing Octopus. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us there. And until next time, as we like to say here, happy deployments. And hopefully we'll see you on an upcoming webinar. Take care, everyone.